We have right now in our K-12 education, kids not learning about finance. They're not learning civics. And the basic economic principles our country were founded on, capitalism, free markets, they're under attack. Even if you ask an upper elementary school student today, public school student, about capitalism or free markets, they will be quick to say those are bad. Those are really bad things. Those are evil people that are over those. And they'll defend Marxism and socialism. This is in US public schools, and it is the norm.
Welcome back to the Future's Edge show. I am Jim Uriel. That's Bob Iacino. Today we have Keri Ingraham, Senior Fellow from the Discover Institute. How are you, and where are you coming to us from?
I am based outside of the Seattle area at Discover Institute, and then I also do some work for Independent Women's Forum, and they are based in DC. So lots of coast-to-coast flights happening.
Can you walk us through what the Discover Institute, what its mission is, what it does?
Yes. So it's actually Discovery Institute. And
I apologize. Yeah, sorry.
No problem. It's a 30-year plus old think tank, originally headquartered in Seattle. And we have a national reach on all of our centers. And then one of our centers actually does work internationally as well. And so we touch on topics from the Center of Science and Culture, human exceptionalism, the economy, technology, citizenship. And then what I'm focused on is K-12 education. And there's other centers throughout that are doing great work around the country on K-12 education as well that we collaborate with, we partner with. And so we want to magnify our work, and just forming these partnerships and allies with others has really helped us move the needle. And so as far as K-12 education, the work specifically is on education freedom, which would be empowering parents with the opportunity to select the school that aligns with their values, that will best serve their unique child. So giving the taxpayer money back to the parents to let them select the school, like a free market landscape is the simplest way to put it. We also focused on parental rights. You know, unfortunately today—
How radical of you, parental rights.
They're just under attack. Like, you send your child to school and you would think that the teacher would communicate back with you and let you know what's going on. But there's just horrific things happening in secrets from moms and dads over their minor age children. And so we're working on that. We're also working on advancing education, entrepreneurship, innovation. So if parents leave the public system because they have this free market opportunity, they've got to have a supply, a place to send their child. And parents aren't interested in that traditional 5-day-a-week factory model, one-size-fits-all approach we've had since the industrial era. And so growing the supply through business people that want to start a micro school, others that are leaving the public system and they have this education expertise and they know there's a better way. They're starting schools. And so we're seeing so many exciting things happening. But we're also focused on public education reform. So we are not forgetting those kids that remain in traditional public schools, and making sure that that system is modernized and serves them better, while also getting out some of this indoctrination that's happening and moving back to core academics, reading, writing, arithmetic, basic things that should go without saying, but unfortunately that's not happening at the level it needs to be happening.
So I have another follow-up question too, is that, okay, so I had an argument. One of my daughters, I have two daughters. One's makes me look like a liberal, but the other is an environmental scientist, but the water part of it, not the carbon capture bullshit stuff. But she's usually pretty level-headed. And we had a discussion about school, and she knew I said I was having you on and I was excited about it. And that almost grew into an argument, because I said I don't want someone talking to my 9-year-old about sex in the classroom. It's not their job. And she's like, well, she said, I agree with you, except for one thing. She said, sex education, I think there's a lot of people that need to be taught about the concept of consent, a lot of young women. And I gave her that one. I was like, yeah, okay, that actually does make a little bit of sense, because people aren't taught that at home. And she said a lot of girls she went to school with, they were victims from boys or from whoever, and they just never really knew what was going on. Is there any validity to her point there, you think, or no?
I'm not going to say it's not valid, but the much larger problem on the attack of girls right now is through this gender ideology where biological males have access to female safe spaces, whether that's bathrooms, even in elementary school, middle school, high school, not just bathrooms, but locker rooms, sports teams, overnight trips. That is the bigger threat.
It's insane.
And we've seen cases across our country where girls are assaulted under the guise of biological male saying that they're transgender, using those spaces as an opportunity to really prey on girls.
Keri, can you tell me exactly what a micro school is? I mean, you mentioned it, and I want to talk about that because I don't have any children, and I talk to a lot of parents in my family, and they're kind of stuck in this is what you're supposed to do mentality. And something Jim and I have talked about a lot is sort of like the falling return on investment of universities and public schools. So what is a micro school and how does it help?
Well, you probably saw my big smile when you asked about micro schools because incredible things are happening. So, dial back to 2020 when schools closed in COVID in that spring. Well, private schools figured out how to be resourceful. They pulled their parents. They saw the majority wanted schools open by the fall. And private schools responded because without paying customers, that's their business model. They're dependent. Public schools, on the other hand, because of teacher unions, kept schools closed in some states spanning 3 school years. And they did that not in the name of safety, but to get irrelevant demands met. So this is happening. Schools are closed. There's these horrible, like haphazard remote Zoom sessions. Can you imagine just an elementary child being placed in front of a computer all day, especially a kindergarten student that can't read yet? Really ineffective. And so parents saw that and they thought, there has got to be a better way. And why is my school closed this long when I'm seeing my neighbors and, friends and relatives, their kids in other states or in other learning environments are going back to school? And so what we saw were parents were checking out of school and saying, I'm going to homeschool. I'm going to figure this out. Like, I'm not going to place my child in front of a computer. So a lot of parents did that. In the fall of 2020, 2021, they started homeschooling. Well, parents started going back to work. They didn't have the stay-at-home work anymore. And so homeschooling wasn't as viable past that first year for families. But they didn't want to send their child back to that district traditional school. In many cases, families didn't just instantly have funds to pay private school tuition. And so they started coming together with neighbors, with friends to start what was originally called a learning pod. So just kind of informal, coming together, well, I have Fridays off from work, so I can cover the kids on Fridays. Oh, you're an engineer, you cover the science. Very creative. And they saw their kids were excited about learning. And these parents, they were subject matter experts. They cared about kids. Kids were engaged, they were learning, and they saw this is so much more effective and it doesn't take 6 to 8 hours a day to cover more content than we saw during Zoom. Okay, so fast forward those learning pods. Well, then educators wanted out of the system. They didn't like, being stuck at home. Teachers love being with kids. They didn't want to sit in front of a computer. And so as this progressed, some of those learning pods turned into micro schools. Other people left, their teaching profession in a brick and mortar school, started a micro school. And what it means is it's just a small school. Some schools, have 5, 6 students or a dozen students. Others might have 20 or 30, but it is a formal school. Some are hybrid where kids come a few days a week. Others are full-time, 5 days a week. They can have different emphasis, whether it's like outdoor education or a science focus. But the goal is not to be big. The goal is to be really effective. They're able to keep the price point extremely low for families because of their model. And they're able to take family feedback and parents, and they're so responsive to serve those parents because of their business model. They need students. And a lot of times the relationships are really close and tight. But the micro school demand is so great that instead of growing the school, what they do is they start another school and another school. So now, We're in 2024 and we're seeing networks of micro schools. This movement has just taken off all over our country. So really pre-COVID, there was no micro schools in essence. And today we've got a few million kids being educated through these micro schools. So super innovative. The learning results are proving out, student engagement and parent satisfaction is off the charts.
So I have a quick question for you. How far off are we from getting hard data to return about the efficacy of these schools in teaching the traditional education, test scores, et cetera, things like that? And I know that's going to be hard to tease out for income levels, things like that, but are we getting close where the data is coming in?
It's really hard to gain data because not all these students immediately left the public system. So some had this great learning loss. Maybe they didn't exit the public system until they were kind of locked out of school for 2 years with those Zoom sessions. So they were behind. Now they're in a micro school, but you've got to go through the school year, then they do the testing, then you've got to wait for the results. And so it's not an efficient system from public all the way to, the private sector on getting test results and really measuring things. But I think give it a few years, the data's going to pan out. And another really exciting thing that's happening in K-12 education is over the last 3 years, parents leaving the system and communicating that they needed options to their lawmakers, to their representatives, to their senators, has resulted in states enacting what is called universal school choice. So every family in the state has the opportunity to pick the school that would best serve their family. So just 3 years ago, no states had this. States had some school choice, but less than like 1% of kids were eligible in the states that had robust plans or robust programs. Now 12 states have universal or near universal school choice. And that's going to transform the landscape. And so it doesn't just make micro schools feasible for parents, but other, kind of full-blown traditional private schools are an option as well. And that, Jim, is where I think we're going to see tremendous strides, just that mass exodus of the public schools. We'll have the numbers, we'll have a lot of data to substantiate and see not just the learning results, but over time, what are the economic implications for the state, workforce development, societal benefits when kids aren't being taught a Marxist worldview any longer, but they're learning critical thinking. And so exciting, but micro schools is a big part of that, as well as the universal school choice.
So where do you get the most pushback from, Keri? Is it from parents who saw schools as daycare and they don't want to be that hands-on? Is it from teachers' unions? It doesn't sound like it's from kids at all.
You nailed it. It's the teacher unions. They have enormous power. So
they want all the things. They want all the things. Sorry.
Enormous
it's the only
power.
union that gets to negotiate with the elected leaders and then vote for them after they negotiate or before they negotiate with them.
It's the largest public school educators. So these teacher unions are the largest monopoly in the world, with the exception of some state-owned monopolies in China. Okay, well, you take that out of the equation. K-12 public education is the largest monopoly. Well, you've got to have teachers to staff those 50 plus million kids. Well, those teachers pay teacher union dues that give millions, hundreds of millions every year. And in turn, the teacher unions use those dues in part to fund political candidates and campaigns. And 99%, it's like 99.7%, I believe, of the two largest teacher unions in the country give, 99% of their funds go to a single political party. Well, then what do they get in return? They get enormous political protection of the monopoly, of those jobs. And at a time when students are leaving the system, public education has been growing the number of employees. Well, that's because teacher unions know if we get more teachers, we get more dues, we get more political power. And it's just this sick cycle, which has nothing to do with the education of children.
So a quick thing, my brother is a high school teacher and has been for many, many years. Each year, and a lot of people don't know this, and you got to multiply this out by millions. Each year he has a specific amount of budget that he's supposed to spend. He's a counselor. And toward the end of the year, if he doesn't spend all of his budget, like if he has $1,500 left to spend, he won't get the same amount for the next year improvement. So he has to scramble to buy new computers and essentially waste, let's say, $1,500 to $2,000 every year towards the end of the school year. Now, just go multiply that out by the rest of the country. This is an enormously ridiculous and wasteful system. So my question, by the way, this is a similar, your push and Keri D'Angelis's push are fairly identical, correct?
Yes, I would count him just a great ally, a colleague doing the similar work and really supporting one another in this
We
effort.
love him. Yeah, I think he does a great job. So what are the numbers again? I know you glossed over them real quickly about the micro schools, but if you take homeschool, and by the way, you guys understood the joke about we want all the things. You guys heard that speech, right? Okay, yeah. Good. Our listeners, I wasn't just going crazy there. That nut job who gave a speech, who's the president of the National Teachers Union, she was the one who said all those things.
And again, they're the only union that elects the people they negotiate with.
Exactly. It's freaking crazy.
They should not be able to negotiate with the people they give jobs to.
Okay. So I wanted to ask what the numbers are between homeschooling and micro schools. How much have they grown in the last 4 years? Do you have the hard data on that?
I don't off the top of my head, but the growth is substantial and It's continuing. One point of, I guess, survey data that might be interesting for you is in January, there was a survey done of parents, and it showed that 72% of parents had either considered a new school, looked for a new school for their child, or actually made the move in the last calendar year. And that's incredible. Crazy. Pre-COVID, those numbers were maybe like 5%, 10% at best. Okay. 72%.
Right. And the reason I asked about the data coming back is because I believe that test scores are going to blow public schools out of the water because you're removing so many of the distractions that go with the public school system. And I think it's going to be excellent. Our viewership is usually we're about 60 or 70% of our shows are finance and economics. So people like hard data. And I don't know if this is a bad question or not, but I'm going to ask it. So can you walk us through how the Institute, where the money comes from, and then what they then, besides paying salaries, do with that money to try to affect the change that we all believe is the right change?
Are you asking about K-12 public education, how they're spending?
No, I'm asking about the Institute, your specific institute. Where does the funding come from, and how can we help? Is more. I'm not trying to say you guys got tons of money. Like where does the funding come from? From corporate donations, from individual donations? What?
Well, that is one of the other hats that I wear is raising the funds to do this work. So we are a nonprofit 501c3 Discovery Institute. The center that I lead is called the American Center for Transforming Education. And we have individuals around the country that believe in this work. They care about individual kids. They care about the future of their state, but they also care about the future of our country. And they see if you continue to provide just pitiful academics on a world stage, the latest NAEP test scores, that's this international test, on the U.S. side in 2023, our 15-year-olds, we ranked 9th in reading, 16th in science, and 34 in math on a world stage. And so we've got people around the country that are supporting this work. They're passionate, they care, but they see the political indoctrination, the agendas pumped on these children, just failure to educate in basic academics is not going to do well for our country in the future. It's truly an economic disaster for the future workforce, but it's also a national security issue. One of our donors, I sat down with him in Dallas last year. We specifically just talked about that danger and that threat to our country if we are not preparing our kids academically.
So for people watching too, like this is not something that's just come about. This was the game plan was drawn out, 150 years ago by the Italian philosopher Gramsci about how to institute Marxism and socialism into societies. And one of the key prongs of that was to infiltrate the school system. Now, they did in our country. It was done very, very well because the unions tend to be collectivists to begin with. And that's one of the reasons that we've gone toward this absolute nonsense. I just wanted to add that in. Bobby?
Yeah. Do you find students have trouble in this particular era? I always get confused as how you could possibly get, I'll just pick a random thing, books, how you can get kids interested in books in the era of TikToks and phones and computer screens. Because I really believe probably about 6-8 months ago, I started doing something that I sort of learned from Andrew Huberman on one of his podcasts. I don't know if you guys are familiar with him at all, but he's a neuroscientist, I think at Stanford, but
Yep.
don't quote me on that. And he said that you should spend the first half an hour of your day staying away from your screens. So your phones, your computers, your TVs, everything. And try and get your eyes sort of looking at the sun and try and read something that's on paper. So I started that probably about 6 months ago. And it's like life changing. It really is. And Jim and I talked about a lot of life changing stuff on the show, believe it or not. So you would think that we'd be smarter than we are. But going into it, do you find problems with students where their attention spans are destroyed versus, say, when you were in school? Or is there some way to fix that within the technology that just isn't going away?
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the book Deep Work by Cal Newport. Read it several years ago, and the next year I actually read it again. It was really interesting. And one of the chapters in there talked about how social media and being on screens really does long-term damage to our brains, just the way we think. And he described Twitter, now called X, as being like crack cocaine for your brain. And I was like, oh, wow, okay, get off all social media. But as he went through the brain science and how your mind works and those connections, where when you read, like, you're in the same thought, it's connected. Well, when you scroll and you're on your phone, you click on this and you click on that, it's doing permanent damage to our brains. And I mean, just a plug for the book, it was really fascinating, but it helped me rethink personally, how much I'm jumping around from things. I would say, today I recognize like it's harder for me to concentrate at the level I could just a few years ago, and my
Yep.
technology has increased. And so just being mindful of it is really important. But the best thing parents can do for their child is read to them from the time they're born. Even if you think, your infant doesn't know what you're saying, can't understand. Some moms even read to their child or dads before the baby is born. And what that does is that makes a huge difference in the student's ability to start kindergarten ready to learn. There is a lot of data on that, kids that have been read to and kids that have not been read to significantly, and how will they perform in school. But then as kids learn to read themselves, there is a lot of data too on their test scores, how well they do based upon how much time they read outside of school each day. And so, I mean, you just can't underestimate the implications of reading. But again, like what is happening in our K-12 public schools today is there's an attack on reading, even like phonics. And so there is a push and there's legislation happening in some states, good policy to get back to what's called the science of reading and truly teaching kids not just to guess, but to know how sounds go together, the phonetic pronunciation, and just keep that standard high, because if you can't read, that hinders kids in all of their other learning.
So I have a question now. What do you, when you view 5 years from now, 10 years from now, what does a success look like to you?
Yeah, I would say more free market principles for K-12 education, because the competition forces public schools to perform better, but it also gives families the opportunity to have an education for their child that aligns with their values. And we can't have one political party continue to be the sole or almost the sole way that children in our country are educated, because it's not working. When those kids graduate around, at 12th grade, they finish, most of them around age 18, they're eligible to vote. What are they going to vote for? They're going to vote for candidates with policies that are of that single political party. And ideas have consequences. And those policies and those ideas, they deal with economics. And so when we have right now in our K-12 education, kids not learning about finance, they're not learning civics, and the basic economic principles our country were founded on, capitalism, free markets, they're under attack. Even if you ask an upper elementary school student today, public school student, about capitalism or free markets, they will be quick to say those are bad. Those are really bad things. Those are evil people that are over those. And they'll defend Marxism and socialism. This is in US public schools, and it is the norm. And so when those kids exit, unfortunately, moms and dads aren't always having the conversations at home to teach a different worldview. And so who do they vote for? They vote for candidates with the policies that they've been taught, because the teacher unions control public education. And it's really harming our country. And so really grateful for our supporters around the country that are donating, that are helping us just expand this movement. The opportunity next year for Texas to become the 13th state to pass universal school choice would be phenomenal. There's around 50 million kids, K-12 public school students in our country. 5.5 of those million are located in Texas. So if Texas passes this, that'll put the total up of 17 million out of 50 million in our country with free market K-12 education. And so, Jim, to your point, when we get the data down the road, it's just going to open the door. Purple states, blue states, they're not going to be able to hold out over time when people continue to move to pro-freedom states, especially when it has to do with their children and their children's
Our governor
education.
here in Illinois, he keeps telling us how everyone's moving here for all the economic opportunities. The numbers don't back that up at all, but that's what he keeps saying. So, by the way, you mentioned about being, again, Bob and I, we tell people who watch it, we don't ever talk about politics. We talk about policy all the time. And we happen to think most of the Democratic policy, particularly on a fiscal business end of it, is just absolute lunacy. And all it's doing is leading us down a bad path. But you mentioned they vote for who they've been told has the great ideas. And then I think back to 2016, because I fully believe, and I don't know if you two agree with me or not, that if Bernie Sanders was allowed to compete in that primary fairly and they didn't pull the rug from him, I actually think he probably would have won the general election and we would have had an actual socialist. First of all, do you remember how that primary played out and Bernie's support and how they completely cheated him? What do you guys think? Am I crazy thinking he may have won the general election? Keri, you up first?
You're drawing me back all the way. 2016. I'll defer to Bobby.
You were probably in college back then, weren't you?
No, not exactly. But that was back in, 2003. But even today, Bernie Sanders' ideas are terrifying to what they would do to our economy.
So I brought him up. I read your article, by the way. Anyway, let's go to that article because I loved it too, the one you wrote about Bernie, because the guy's an absolute clown and a fool. And anyone, respect for the office of senator, I have so little respect for him because people hurt when you institute those sort of policies. But please tell us about your article you wrote because I loved it.
Okay, well then after that, let's make sure we get Bobby's take on it. Just exposing that Bernie Sanders has put forth this legislation called the 32-hour work week. And he puts forth that should be mandated. So not, maybe somebody wants to only work part-time, that sort of idea. No, it should be mandated. That is absolutely crazy. So you're asking employers to continue to provide full-time benefits for somebody that's not working full-time. That's a 20% drop in labor. And what that would do is that would kill the backbone of our economy, which is small business owners, making up over 40% of the business economic activity. And so, they're already crunched with inflation, labor costs going up, taxes, regulations. And we've seen in the last year, in the last 12 months, 1.5 million jobs have moved from full-time to part-time. But when you see these jobs numbers, they're just gaslighting people, because now if somebody has 2 part-time jobs that don't even equal a full-time job, they're counting that as like job growth of 2 jobs.
Yep.
And so Bernie Sanders' idea of people are overworked, corporations make too much money, his idea of redistributing wealth, this socialism idea, it is going to crush our economy. And we already have a problem with our economy. And so Bernie Sanders' ideas are entitlement. They're crazy. We're seeing what he's doing with college loan forgiveness, that idea that he's just been spearheading. Why should somebody that didn't go to college, that's a hardworking American, have to pay for somebody that has a degree in gender studies from an Ivy League school where, they have hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt? It just doesn't make sense. I could go on all day about Bernie Sanders, but I'll pass back to Bobby.
Well, I'm 100% convinced he would have won that general election. And I'm 100%, there's things that I'm against that I kind of think should happen. And that would have been one of them, because we would have been 4 years and done, and the idea of socialism would have been dead. There would have been nobody left going, you know what, that was a good plan. It did work out, specifically because of some of the things that Keri was saying. But the whole idea that, and I'll put this in front of anyone, voting for career politicians and civil servants because they have experience in theoretical civil service, to then try and be a steward of an economy when they've never worked within it, for the most part, is ridiculous to me. It's like Pete Buttigieg being the transportation secretary. He knows nothing about that era or that sort of discipline, and he becomes transportation secretary. Based on what? It's like Hunter Biden being on the board of an energy company. Based on what? Right? Yep. These are all just gifts, and they drive me crazy. But I want to go back to something that we were talking about, because I've always had this thought that people are attached to routine, right? And how much are teachers currently, there's good teachers, right? Obviously there is. And it's a hard job, and you're underpaid, and maybe you work 9 months out of the year, so maybe you're paid fairly. I don't really know.
182 days. Anyway, go on.
Yeah, I don't know enough about that. But I know a lot of people back in, I don't live in Chicago anymore, but when I did, a couple of our close friends were public school teachers, and they were off in the summertime. They literally did virtually nothing. They'd hang out by the pool, and then they'd complain about how much money they made. And I'd tell them, well, why aren't you waiting tables in the summer? And they'd get really mad at me, right? A lot of people I knew that sort of didn't have the work ethic of maybe somebody who's running a micro school or somebody who's homeschooling their kids. Maybe they're doing it 12 months out of the year. I don't know. Teachers themselves, Keri, how do you guys suggest that teachers are held to account? Is it just test scores? Because isn't there data, and tell me I'm wrong if I am, isn't there data that some people just test better than others, and it's not necessarily an indication of how well they know subject matter?
Well, we've got such a problem with how teachers are selected and how they're trained in our country. We've got the incentives all wrong. So you get an entry-level teacher that comes in, and it's a salary schedule. So it looks simply on their experience, which for a brand new teacher would be 0. And it looks at, what degrees they have. Do they have just a bachelor's, a master's, a doctorate, so on. Well, it's a stair step. And so it incentivizes people to stay in the profession, irrelevant of performance. We're talking about education of our kids. I gave those numbers of how U.S. public education students are performing on a world stage. We can't settle for that, but it's rewarding teachers just to simply stay in the system. And it's ignoring amazing, great performance of teachers on the other hand. And so that's got to be adjusted, but also how teachers are selected and trained need to be changed. They go through a lot of general classes about education, but they're not necessarily subject matter experts. And that is the key to effective teaching based on the data. And so teacher certification, which is, just this sacred cow of the teacher unions, puts a roadblock for highly qualified individuals to want to enter the profession. As one example, the chairman of our education center, he built a company. He took it from a basement. He started with a friend all the way to the New York Stock Exchange. He retired at age 52, and he wanted to devote the rest of his adult working life to public education. He wanted to be a teacher, teach business classes. He couldn't do that unless he went back and got a teacher degree. He'd gone to Harvard Business School, aced his classes, super successful, all the experience in the world. But they're saying, if you don't have that stamp, if you don't go back, pay the tuition money, and so they're linked up with these university schools of education, you can't do that. And so we're keeping out the best and the brightest. And that's not how other high-performing countries around the world do it. They make teaching like the gold star profession. Singapore is just one example. And then they incentivize great teachers to stay by rewarding performance. So we've got all the incentives wrong. But I give that as an example because right now there's a massive teacher shortage, not overall, but in science, math, and that's where our students are doing so poorly. But again, we've got the incentives all wrong, and we're keeping out good subject matter experts who care about kids and simply want to make a difference.
That's
Keep
interesting
people who
because
have
that's
been
something you
doing it
don't
the same old
hear.
way, ineffective in the system.
It's something you don't hear a lot about, that they're not subject matter experts. And it's like the most obvious statement I've heard on this whole show that I didn't really know. Right? I mean, I didn't really realize that. I guess I should have known when one of my grade school teachers was a history teacher, a biology teacher, and a gym teacher, all in the same. And I'm like, wow, he's a really smart guy. I have a close friend who was a history teacher in Buffalo, and he left to become a pharmaceutical salesperson because he wasn't making enough money to feed his family. But the guy's passionate about history. Like, he loves it. He loves every minute of it. He still reads books about it. We talk about it all the time. Yet you've got people in the Baltimore school system getting paid. When, if I read correctly, I don't think one child in the Baltimore public school system could read at their grade level at the last group of tests. I mean, it's just crazy to me. So is it something that has to start from the top or from the bottom? In other words, do universities have to demand more? Or is it the parents at this sort of ground floor level that have to say, we're just not doing this anymore?
Such a great question. The strategy that's going to be most effective is to take the power away from the teacher unions. And that is, a decade plus long effort. But the fastest way to do that is for parents to take their children elsewhere. And so advancing policies in states that are universal school choice, the best, kind of the gold standard would be an education savings account where they can use that however they see fit, whether it's homeschool, micro school, private school, online, hybrid school. And when those students leave and they're going elsewhere, and the data showing, that those other schools, it doesn't even compare to a public school and the quality of education those children are receiving through a different learning environment. But also, it's going to just kill their number of members. And when their members are smaller and they're paying less dues, they're going to have to get off of these indoctrination, woke agendas, get back to academics, and be competitive. But being the largest monopoly in the world, they haven't had to be competitive. They've maintained the status quo, giving all that money to the single political party, the Democrats, that protect their monopoly. It's just this cycle. And, the silver lining of COVID was parents had a front row seat and they were dissatisfied, and they saw the teacher unions' agendas were political. Just as one example, in Los Angeles Unified School District, their teacher unions said, we are not going to reopen schools, not because of COVID, not because of safety, until X, Y, and Z are met. And what those demands were: defunding the police, Medicare for all, and a moratorium on charter schools. Those were their political demands before they let kids come back. And so taking the power from the teacher unions is the strategy. And when you do that, you get great education champions in the office of governors, and you've got a trifecta in a state that can pass things, not just universal school choice, but start passing education reforms on the public side, teacher performance pay, getting rid of certification, and looking at qualifications. You can start passing those things. That's going to take the power away from the university schools of education when they don't just have this, instant supply of people that have to get their certification. And it's going to revolutionize K-12 education. So the momentum's starting. We've got 12 states. Next year, hopefully Texas and a few more come on. But just continuing that strategy is going to be the most effective to free up families, but also in time, which will be a while away, be able to pass reforms that deal with public education and making it more effective.
What Keri's saying too is that the only path to victory here, and I agree with this 100%, is to essentially break the power of the teachers union. The only way to do that is to provide an alternative. And these people who are watching now, and us, what's the best way for us to support the movement? Is it through writing checks to the Institute? Is it what would you suggest to these people who are hearing your words and saying, wow, that is a very, very noble goal. Let's get on board.
Yeah, the best thing to do, I would say, is support our work. So you can go to discovery.org/education, make a contribution, because we've seen such success with our very small team and with our allies around the country. But we need to grow that, because with more, we can do more. And we've got a winning strategy and it's working. I mean, to have 12 states in 3 years, where for decades, it was Milton Friedman's dream, there was essentially just minimal progress. But the opportunity is so ripe right now to just continue the momentum. And like I said, it's starting as a red state strategy, but in time, it's going to put pressure on those purple states. And over more time, when we see all of the benefits, societal, political change, economics, cultural, blue states are going to have to take notice.
But it has to be local, right? I mean, Florida has it. I remember them talking about it when they passed it. I think they passed it in late 2023. Governor DeSantis signed. I live in Florida, by the way. I was in Chicago most of my life, but I moved to Florida when my IQ increased. And he just hates when I do that.
Challenge.
But is it local? Is local more important? Because Jimmy and I talk a lot about it. Like, we talk about the presidential election and the debates and things like that, but we talk a lot about how local matters so much more. So is it local that matters more from a voting perspective of trying to get these things through? You're talking about state by state progress, right?
Yes. So in essence, K-12 public education was designed to be governed at the state level. Now, with COVID and the federal government just pumping in $180 billion, I mean, they've tried to control it more and more in an unhealthy way. We've got to shrink the footprint of the U.S. Department of Education. It has over 4,000 employees. It's highly ineffective.
It's got to go.
As it's gone up, our students' learning has gone down. It doesn't make sense. There is no ROI on it. And so it's got to be at the state level. The state controls, who can teach, teacher pay, all of those policies. And so you can open up the free markets at the state level, but you also can enact all of the public school reforms at that level. And that's where it needs to happen.
So, Keri, are you familiar with Vivek Ramaswamy? We had him on the show. Jimmy, was it before he announced or after? I don't remember. I think
he had, because our push was to get him on the debate stage and raise funds for him.
Yeah.
And we mentioned on the show.
He was running. So we had him on the show, and we pushed him pretty hard on him just saying, I can eliminate this entire department. So one of them was the Department of Education. He goes, day one, I disbanded. It's gone. And he actually went into detail as how the president has the power to do that by not approving the funding for the Department of Education. Are you for that kind of a radical move if somebody would actually do it like him? If you were to get elected, he said, Department of Education's gone tomorrow. Or do you think they do any good at all?
I would be hard pressed.
That's a tough one.
Find some good that couldn't be done better at a state level. I would say the Heritage Foundation, they've been the leader on the forefront of this. So probably where, he got that idea and the strategy for how to do it. Lindsey Burke there has put together an outstanding plan for how to eliminate the U.S. Department of Education in detail, in a strategic way, in a thoughtful way. And so I'd point people to her work on it. But absolutely, Discovery Institute, we wholeheartedly support that. Get the control back in the states. Make sure that it's effective. And that's where the accountability is going to be, because there has not been any accountability for the enormous federal control and federal spending through the Department of Education.
So far, I realize you mentioned the nonsense that are going on with the labor numbers. You mentioned Milton Friedman. You mentioned Kevin Roberts is one of our buddies on the show. You're saying all the right things in our show. There's one economist left that if you mention them, I will send you Brand swag. I'll do something. You will win, because Bobby and I have a favorite economist, but you're hitting all our points to be one of our best friends going forward. And thank you for that. Do you have any guess who our economist is that we quote the most?
I don't
know.
Not
Frederick Hayek. It's not Mrs.
You just teed that up with a lot of pressure here.
I know. I wanted to put pressure on you. You seem like you can handle pressure.
I'll give you a hint. There are no solutions. There are only trade-offs.
Oh,
You're about to become our hero.
You can tell by her face, she knows.
She knows.
Okay, I'm probably going to come back to it here in like 5 minutes after I have the opportunity.
We'll give it to you at the end, but you're already pretty much a hero. Can we go back
Oh.
to an economics thing real quick? Because we talked about Bernie Sanders and we got just a few minutes left. But so Bernie Sanders, everything he comes out with, as you mentioned, seems to have small business in its crosshairs. One of our good friends, Carol Roth, wrote the book, The War on Small Business.
Oh,
I don't know
I thought of it. Ronald Reagan.
Nope.
No.
Economist, I said.
Oh, economist. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So he's at the tail end of his life. That's one hint, but he is still alive.
Okay. I might strike here.
Thomas Sowell.
Oh,
We're huge fans. And
I've
one
got
of his
some of his books back on my shelf.
Everybody does that has a brain.
He is
Yeah.
absolutely amazing.
He is amazing. But anyway, so we talked about Bernie Sanders and everything he does, whether it be ridiculous oppressive minimum wage laws, seems to hurt small business more than big. 32-hour work week obviously hurts small business more than big. I am at a point where I believe it's insidious. I believe it's nefarious. I believe he's actually would love to see all small business go out of business, just big business that the government can control. So my question to you, is he just a moron, you think, and doesn't understand the implications of the policies he's put forward? Or does he understand them completely? Because there is a difference, I think. I think if it's genuinely nefarious, it's far, far worse than just run-of-the-mill incompetence. Where do you stand on that?
I don't know if I've ever been asked if I think Bernie Sanders is a moron before. This is like a brand new
Now you have.
interview question for me.
Not a normal one. Did you expect to get normal questions on our show?
Hey,
Anyway, go on.
As much as these ideas are so crazy, I truly think that the radical left believes they're effective.
Yeah.
Like, I think they are so far.
I think Bernie does too.
They believe
I agree with you on that. Yeah. I don't think Elizabeth Warren cares if they're effective or not. I just think she spouts what she's supposed to spout. But I do think that Bernie, I will say this for sure. There's no question he's a moron. And like my dog knows more about economics than Bernie does. But I do think Bernie has integrity. I think he believes in what he's saying. And he actually thinks that this is a path to this shared prosperity. We who've studied economic history a little more than he has, it seems, know that, the only time you can get wealth equality is if everybody has zero. And if it's socialism that he wants, I would like to volunteer myself to equally distribute the stuff. You know what I mean? I'll just do that. I'm no hero. I'll just help with all that. But so you think
that Bernie has
just said, let's start distributing his stuff first. Bobby, what do you have?
I think that, so one of the things that is common amongst at least sort of the intellectual conservative side of things, and I could be wrong on this, but the smartest ones, the ones that I admire the most, and I'm pretty sure this applies to Jimmy as well, are soft-spoken, like your Kevin Roberts, your Thomas Sowells, your Milton Friedmans. They're just kind of quiet about what they know because they know it. And you can't really stump them. Like watching those old Milton Friedman presentations, whether it was on public television or whether it was at a university, and he's like, but you're putting a value on that, just soft spoken, right? And again, and you, Keri, just soft spoken, you know what you know. Jimmy and I yell and scream, so we're obviously a notch below all of you guys. But Bernie's bluster is what makes me think that he's just dumb. Because you can't talk your way out of an argument, right? You can't talk your way out of an intellectual paper bag. So you yell and you punch and you kick and you scream, right? And Bernie and Elizabeth Warren does the same thing, and AOC does the same thing. And I'm hard pressed to find somebody on the left or on the right that I really truly admire deep down that has that bluster. I mean, I wouldn't put President Trump as someone that I really truly admire, although I think, in my view, at this point, he's the clear choice. But it's part of the reason that I was such a fan of Vivek. Somebody the other day he was given some chat, and this woman just went through a list of why he's not qualified and why he's basically a biotech and pharma thief. And he went, okay, so there's a lot there. Let me go through all of those. And he just talked, so that's why I look at that and I think Bernie's just dumb.
What do you think, Keri, when you look at the right? Who are the beacons of hope? Because, again, I will crawl over glass to vote for Donald Trump. I don't believe he's necessarily a good president, but it's a binary. You know what I mean? He was not my choice, but of course I'm going to vote for him. He's basically being running unopposed. But who is someone, when I vote, I vote Republican. I'm not a Republican. For the most part, I despise the Republicans. I think they have a bad plan, but I'm an anti-Democrat. I vote against Democrats. I don't like being this way. Who's someone who you get excited about on the right?
Well, you mentioned Kevin Roberts. He's a dear friend. He's doing incredible work at Heritage. I would say the same as our president at Discovery Institute, Steve Burhai. Incredible leader, soft-spoken, but brilliant.
Yeah, but who's gonna run for office? Who's
I
gonna
would
be the
say somebody that fits that description, that has done enormous good with smart policy but gets overlooked, is Governor Ron DeSantis. What he's done on education, K-12, higher ed, protecting girls' sports, but then on a business side, he has such wisdom. He leads with strength. And he's grounded. He's principled. He is not going to change his stance to win the vote of the day. So much respect for him. But looking at the policies of what he has passed and the implementation side, it's hard to compare to anyone else at that level of a modern day, not a national leader, but a state leader.
Yeah. No, and I agree with that. He is someone I do get excited about. I will criticize a couple different things. We talked about, how he kind of bailed out people who lived on the coast, and I would love to have seen the free market do that. With his war with Disney, although it was very, very valid, the timing of it made it seem like it was vindictive. Everything he was saying were the right things. They didn't deserve what they deserved, but the timing of it smacked of, oh yeah, I'll come and get you. I didn't love that too. I think we should have been above it. But other than that, I agree with you completely. Who's going to be the vice president?
I know several that I'm hoping aren't.
Let's get that list.
Well, let me keep that one off the record here.
Okay, fine. If you don't want to ruffle any feathers, you go for donations with these people sometimes. Who do you like?
I would say Tim Scott. And most recently, just yesterday, actually, I heard the name of Governor Glenn Youngkin. I think both of those gentlemen would be tremendous asset to the next presidential administration.
I want
but from a game
as vice president. Don't you think that would be funny? Like every day would be funny.
Don't you? Okay, Keri, and again, I'm from a house of women. I'm a big people's rights person. I'm kind of hoping that Donald Trump picks a woman, only because I love the fact that the Republicans appointed the first female Supreme Court justice, although the left seems to ignore that all the time. I would love for the fact that to put a woman, and I know it wouldn't obviously be the first, but do you think that Kristi Noem is a decent choice? Do you think, who else? Is there a woman that could be that?
I think she fell off the page when her book came out. Just,
she shot
her name was there and then it hasn't surfaced again.
You can't shoot dogs. Right.
Not to say there's not women who would do a great job, but it's a matter of who would do the very best. And a lot has to do with personality to make a balance and different strengths. And that's why I see Tim Scott or Governor Glenn Youngkin as being the best fit. I would say Ron DeSantis for sure. That would never happen. But, he has a tremendous future ahead of him as he continues in Florida, hopefully beyond.
Right. I wasn't even thinking in terms of who would do the better job, which I should have been. And I'm glad you let it back.
Yeah, I'll say this, Jimmy, that I got smacked by Carol Roth about that when I was talking to her about being on the show. I told her, we really want to make sure we mix it up and have a lot of women on the show. And she goes, if you're asking me to be on the show because I'm a woman, the answer is no. And I was like, oh boy, that was a bad
perfect. She's our kind of person, right? Yeah. We thought we were speaking her language, right?
Yeah.
So Keri, can you tell the gang here one more time, what's the best way to support what you're doing? And by the way, if you guys don't think it's important to be supporting this movement and trying to go against the teachers union, you are completely wrong. This affects us at every level, financially, educationally, the way we compete in a global stage. This is monumental shit. Where can they find you and support you?
They can find me on X at Keri D. Ingraham. And our website is discovery.org/education. We're called the American Center for Transforming Education. That is our goal, to transform this outdated system, bring in free market principles, protect parental rights, bring in innovation, which is so long overdue, spur education, entrepreneurships, principles of business have got to come into K-12 to bring in competition, and also reform traditional public education. So we're at discovery.org/education.
Guys, please, if anything, just go to the website, read some of the articles, see what they're about, then maybe write a check. That's what you're asking about. Bobby, do you have any last words before I play us out?
Yeah, definitely write a check.
Definitely write a check. Checks are better. Say it with money. But anyway, thank you, guys. This is the Future's Edge Show. I'm Jim Uriel. That's Bob Iacchino. Today we've had Keri Ingraham, who is the senior fellow. But by the way, senior fellow is a cool title. Senior fellow at the Discovery Institute, not the Discovery Institute. I apologize for that before. But remember what Bobby and I's mission has been. Both of us were in mainstream media for many, many years, 20 years apiece, each of us. And we found there that couldn't really give your honest opinions about things because there was always pressure from producers who were pressured by sponsors. So you're never getting the straight story. You may think we're full of shit and that our opinions are wrong, but they are our honest opinions without the influence of anyone else. And we thank you guys for joining on this. Please DM us if you have questions or comments. Please retweet the show. Thank you so much for the support. We are humbled by it. This has been The Future's Edge.